Hello. So the article we will be discussing today is called Odin, Magic, and a Swedish Trial. It discusses a witch trial that took place in Stockholm, Sweden in 1484, and involves a man who was charged with witchcraft for invoking the Norse god Odin in an attempt to help himself financially. So Odin was associated with wealth to Scandinavians. Those accused of worshipping Odin were thought to do so for purposes of financial gain. And while the cultural elite of the society, which religious authorities were certainly a part of, were much more likely to not need Odin's help in this way, although the average Swede might think differently. So the trial took place in the same year where Pope Innocent VIII issued his papal bull, Summus Desiderantes. And this pretty much propagandized religious authorities into thinking there was this great scourge on their lands, and then it gave them the legal precedent for ridding this scourge from their diocese. So what this meant to the average Swede was that any utterance of past pagan beliefs could now be subject to persecution. The fact that Norse mythology was a part of the social fabric of society was of no consequence to those doing the persecution. In the court documents, we see that Odin is seen as the chief of devils by the ecclesiastic authorities. But would he have been seen in the same way from the opposite end of the power structure? So clearly, to both the poor and the elite, Odin seemed to have some power. And in Norse mythology, Odin is the highest and oldest of the gods. He wears a cloak and a hat and has only one eye, having traded the other for wisdom. He has many other names, including Allfather, Grimnir, and the Gallows God. In the myths, he is brilliant, unknowable, and dangerous, very much similar to the God of the Old Testament, who could be benevolent to mankind one minute and brutal the next. So the gods of Norse mythology exist in an icy world that is very similar to the ones the Scandinavians inhabited themselves. The harsh conditions in which they lived was reflected in their mythology. So Sweden became officially Christianized by the 12th century, although there was a crusade taken against pagan Swedes in Småland, southeastern part of the Swedish kingdom, by Norwegian king Sigurd the Crusader in the early 12th century. Interestingly enough, our article mentions Småland again as the location of witch trials in 1693, where the defendant was accused of inviting in Odin, so the beliefs of the past seem to persist. You know, that's a long 12th century to 1693. That's a long period of time. So even as Sweden became a Christian nation, the fabric of Norse mythology was so ingrained in the culture that even Christian scholars of the medieval times acknowledged its presence. The names of the week Thursday and Wednesday were remnants of this collective pagan past that still kept the power of Odin alive.
Nordic exceptionalism was categorized with a charm formula that was recorded in the early modern era to invoke the powers of deities. Interestingly enough, the deities called upon were not just the Christian god, but also the gods of the Norse: Odin, Thor, Frey, and Freya, and even Satan and Beelzebub. This charm enforces the idea of Jan Assmann's theory of memory culture, where parts of the Nordic world would still hold true to the old religion before they were forced to convert. Another concept that was revived through studying Nordic traditions was the superorganic, referring to an attempt that would be able to give form to the reality of social life or culture. One of the fundamental examples of the superorganic concept was Odin's name being invoked during rituals in the late medieval and early modern Sweden. It was thought that through uttering his name, it would bring you all the wealth that you could ever need. The case of Erik Clausen in 1642 had to do with exactly that. He was accused of trying to gain riches by uttering Odin's name, which is done by performing rituals on Thursday nights, with special emphasis on the ninth Thursday night. These charm magic rituals became a tradition for the Swedish to perform to keep their heritage alive. Even though the Swedish religious authorities were very much anti-witchcraft, there is recognition in Odin's power in calling him the devil of devils. Even though they are using their Christian imagery to call him a devil, it is interesting that he is recognized as a leader of devils, as Odin is the father of the gods. There are many similarities in Norse mythology with Christianity that might have at first hastened the proliferation of Christianity, but eventually allowed for persistence of the tales of old that were a deep part of Swedish culture. The end of the world epic Ragnarok from Norse mythology has some similarities with Revelations. The hammer of Thor was easily replaced by a cross, but remnants of the ancient beliefs were only given a new coat of paint. The cultural structure of the past still remains.